You're listening to Find the Good News, episode 26, The Golden Seam, featuring Matt Young. This episode of Find the Good News is sponsored by Parker Brand Creative Services, a branding agency that thinks sideways, pushes forward, and gets your brand up. Check out our work at parkerbrandup.com. Would you like to help make sure I'm asking my guests the really good questions? Just visit findthegood.news and click the questions tab. I'll see if I can get your question dropped in the fishbowl. Each episode, my guests will dive deep, select 3 random questions, and if yours is selected, I'll ask it on the show. That's findthegood.news. There are people in our lives that everyone knows and that everyone holds in high regard. That respect often comes from the actions and good works of those individuals. Sometimes it's their good nature that places them in such high regard. More often, it's some combination of both. I'm always looking to meet them, these people who bind good works with their good nature, and share their heart and soul with you on Find the Good News. Matt Young, the director of 1911 Historic City Hall Arts and Cultural Center in Lake Charles, Louisiana, is one of those people. I've spoken to Matt many times over the years, and while our conversations were never very long, I was always left feeling better than I did before the encounter. Some have said that that's Matt's special gift, the ability to make a person feel like their conversation was the most important one that he'd had all day. And I wouldn't disagree with that. Matt's friendly, charming, articulate, and professional. Precisely the person anyone would want representing their project, group, organization, or movement. But I'm always interested in the source. Where do these good qualities come from? What gives rise to them? What's holding them all together? For Matt, like many of us, it is the golden seam, the gilded glue that celebrates the cracks and fractures instead of running from them or denying they exist. Like many, like all, Matt Young has faced his own doubts, insecurities, and personal pains. He's covered his true and best self, as many of us have done, fearing that in revealing all our parts, we would lose many in our circle of friends, families, and peers. By bringing all of the parts of his life out into the open, Matt has actually been witness to something wonderful, something that I would wish for all people. It is the golden seam that binds people to each other, the shining goodness that can be found in the beings around us if we give them a chance to be brighter. The glimmer of hope that invades the cracks and fractures, that heals, that unites. Yes, we talked about his professional journey to where he is today, as well as the new and exciting things that he and those working with him have in store for us at 1911 Historic City Hall. While all of those things are soaked in good news for Southwest Louisiana, I believe it's Matt Young's heart, radiating genuine kindness and goodness, that will make all of his good works and future endeavors pure gold.
Wake up, it's morning. You're dreaming up a story. I can hear the way it's going, 'cause you're laughing in your sleep on the path to your deliverance, and a holy wall of light pouring through your window.
Old news, bad news, fake news. Sometimes you just want to shut it all down and get no news at all. With Find the Good News, I aim to change that by focusing on good people doing good work. I visit with artists, educators, civic and spiritual leaders, musicians, business owners, students, volunteers, and everyday citizens who are using their creativity, resources, and talents to bring hope and happiness to their corner of the world. In each episode, I dig into the hearts and minds of my extraordinary guests. We have street-level conversations about relatable things going on in their lives, discover the critical life experiences that shape them, the perspectives that drive them, and the fundamental beliefs that are anchoring them to a path of goodness. There's a lot of news in the world. My name is Oran Parker, and I'm going to find the good.
And I love you just as well.
No, John O'Donnell, right after we finished rolling, he said, I want to recommend somebody. I mean, we hadn't even cut 2 seconds, and he said, Matt Young. And I was like, oh, I love Matt. And I actually had you on my list to contact. And he said, Matt has the gift of making you feel that you're the most important person that he talked to that day.
That's very nice. I have great deal of respect for John O'Donnell, and I think he's changing the world one day at a time. He really is. He's tackling a lot of tough issues that people don't want to address, but they're key issues that need to be addressed before we can move forward.
Yeah, that's the thing. Talking about uncomfortable things. Tom Trahan kind of said this on his show when we were visiting. He said, you can't almost change anybody's mind anymore, and we're not able to have conversations in a constructive way. It turns into just sort of polarized views, waiting for your turn to speak, that type of thing, and dialogue is ended.
Yeah. I think that there are three kind of people in Lake Charles. There's the person that has no interest in becoming involved, and they really don't care what direction the city's heading. And then there are the other two types of people are both who care about the city and they care about it deeply. There are those who are willing to make some waves and have uncomfortable conversations in order to move forward. And there's those who's being very politically correct.
Right.
And those people aren't accomplishing much.
Yeah.
By playing it careful. They might get some traction and a lot of followers, but at the end of the day, they're not going to be able to make the change that we need.
Well, yeah, I agree. I mean, that's one thing, even just in your own home. I mean, making changes. You have to make habits out of that stuff,
yes.
And it's very hard to change your habits, especially if you've lived one way. My wife and I talk about this all the time, even like something simple like single-use plastic and switching to your own grocery bags. And that doesn't sound like a world-changing thing, but if everybody does that, you start to see a change. And so, we talk about it constantly. I said, look how hard it is to break this habit, though. You remember sometimes and sometimes you don't. And, now the frequency of how often you remember to do that one simple change gets higher and higher as you do it, but it takes a while to make change.
Yeah. And when the newness of doing something that is world changing wears off, you stick with it.
Right.
You feel really good about taking your own bags out of the truck in the first month. You're unpacking them, but then where do those bags go? Oh, it's just I got to run by the store. I don't have the bags. No big deal.
You nailed it. That's right.
Sure. So perseverance.
Yeah, my son and I talk about that in the morning because every morning we stop to get a drink before school, and so we all have aluminum straws, aluminum cups, and everybody's got one. And so we'll get in the truck, and I'll grab mine I keep one in the truck, one at the office. There's one everywhere I go, so I don't have to get styrofoam and plastic and all this stuff. And we'll go to get out of the truck, and he goes, "Oh," and I'm like, "What?" He goes, "I left my cup at the house." And he gets that, but it's good because it's like now he's got that little sting, right?
100%.
That sting turns into a new habit.
It's so funny you're talking about straws and John O'Donnell. The first time that I invited he and his wife Kelsey to our house, we were having a pool party.
Yeah.
And we brought out these plastic straws with the little umbrellas on them.
Yeah.
And I was passing them around. Everybody have fun. It's a festive environment and whatnot. And John was like, "We're not going to use that." And I'm kind of offended that you brought that out. It's like, are you kidding me? Really? That's where we're going with that? And after I got over myself and realized he's really right. I will not make the mistake of having plastic straws at a party moving forward, though. I guarantee that.
It is weird how that just having somebody in your life who's noticing those things. I mean, it's good.
Yeah.
I think some people take that as an annoyance because it's like, I want to live my life. I shouldn't have to worry about that type of stuff. And nobody should be pointing a finger at me to make a change. But I think it's good to have those voices out there.
Yeah, don't be so confident in yourself that you think that your way is the right way or it's the only way that it can be done. And if you're willing to consider other perspectives, I think you're able to learn and achieve a little bit of a higher order.
Man, we jumped in.
Shoot, I guess.
I mean, right out the gate. God, we were talking at the door. So jumping back to what we were talking out at the door about. So if you could flesh out the connection to Alita Barnes.
Yeah, so Alita Barnes has been a friend of my parents and my family for a long time. Whenever we were kids, she was very much like an aunt to us. We went on several vacations with she, and I think Jason Barnes came along.
Yeah.
He was like an older mentor, somebody that I really looked up to. We went to Biloxi. I think she was the first person that brought me offshore fishing. And I caught a shark, and I remember on the way to the vacation, I was thinking that we were catching 10-foot sharks. We were actually going to go out there and catch jaws. And whenever I got out there, I was thinking we were going to use like nylon rope to reel them in. And then I remember we were pulling in these 1.5-2 foot sharks.
Okay.
And it was a lot more manageable. But she lived right here across from your office.
Okay.
She was on Quincy Street, and several times we came down, maybe during the summer growing up, and would stay overnight. I remember her bringing us to a couple of the spring productions that she would put on in Sulphur. Man,
it's funny when you brought that up. I mean, when she comes up, it just cracks open a whole egg of memories for me, because spring production changed my life, and I cannot understate that. I was a modest mouse young man. I mean, I worked in my dad's business and I had good friends, but I was always afraid to step out into like a leadership role. I want to be a wallflower, and struggled with social anxiety. Didn't know that's what it was, but taking her speech class it changed everything. And then my senior year for spring production, she was like, I want you to be a producer, which that was kind of the leadership role. Terrified, man. And I even used my dad as an excuse, saying, I have to work, I can't do that. And so she went and talked to my dad and was like, hey, I want your son to do this. I was so scared. But it was like she knew that if she could just pierce that veil a little bit, it was going to change everything. And it did. I learned to settle into myself.
Big time.
Yeah. And I was like, man, she doesn't know maybe really the treasure that is to me today.
Very, very similar experience for me. I was a shy, quiet kid in school, probably up until around 7th or 8th grade, and she encouraged me to run for student council one year. I made student council at DeRidder Junior High, and then whenever I got to 9th grade, she encouraged me to run for class president, which was completely out of my comfort zone. But she wrote this really funny script for me to get up the podium and say, and it obviously got my classmates' attention. They were laughing, it put them at ease, and her encouraging me to do that, I still credit today for giving me a confidence as a student and really wanting to take some leadership roles on. So, same experience.
That's insane. You said a word like 5 times there, encouragement. How big a value is that to a young person?
It's everything, and I hope that one day Alita Barnes hears from as many people as she can about the change that she really inspired in their life. Having somebody to believe in you or rooting for you is so important, and at the end of the day, it breaks my heart to think that there are kids who go to sleep who don't have people rooting for them, encouraging them to become themselves and their own genuine, authentic version of themselves.
I hear you. My son is a special kid. I really think he is. And so some of the things that he shares with me of kids that are sort of in his orbit, it'll bring you to tears. I mean, I always tell him, I said, you don't realize the value of a peaceful home and parents that really listen to you, allow you to be yourself 100%, and encourage you to become more yourself, whatever that may be. Some kids are not getting that. And maybe the only time they're getting it is like a beacon in the darkness, like Alita, or some adult who just takes an extra minute.
Sure. Believes in them and really encourages them to be themselves. I was having this conversation with Ken Baskin last week. He's the ceramics professor at McNeese.
Okay.
And they've got a show at 1911 Historic City Hall right now. Everybody want to come by and check out the show. It's really amazing local artist work. But he was describing to me the fashion in which the professors at McNeese really worked with their students. And he explained it like this. He said, I don't want to create little replicas of me, little mini versions of Ken Baskin and what I produce and how I produce it. I'd like to inspire them to create their own genuine version of their artist or their own genuine body of work. Not little mini representations of the teacher, but really giving them the tools that they need to become the artist that they were meant to be. Yeah, God, man, you're nailing everything that I think about with kids. I mean, to me, that's been the highest reward in my life is having kids and having young people that you can help. And I've only just recently begun to enter that stage, I guess, with my teenage son, where it's kind of a funny thing. And I bet a lot of parents would love to have their kids say this to them. But when he'll come up to me and he goes, Dad, you were one step ahead of me again. And I'm like, okay, what is it this time? And he's like, well, you remember whenever you told me what XYZ advice, that actually is exactly what happened. And I'm glad that I listened to what you said. And I'm going, man, I mean, to have a teenager tell you that over and over again. And I do kind of chuckle. I told my wife the other day, I said, well,
My son's 15 and I'm 44, and so it took me that many years to get one step ahead of my 15-year-old. So I said, it's kind of comical in that regard. But it kind of makes me think about one of the words I wrote down. It's the first word I wrote down when I thought of you, and it's something I do with everybody that comes on this show. What word, just one word, if I can sum up that person just as a perception. And the word was trajectory. And this is why I wrote that down with you, because I have to look at you before I get to know you really as just exactly as I've experienced you. And so what I've seen is somebody who I didn't know come from sort of out of nowhere, at least in my perception, which I know now you lived in DeRidder, right? You're from DeRidder.
I grew up in DeRidder, moved back to Lake Charles in 2008.
2008.
Coming back from Newport Beach, California.
Wow. Okay. I didn't know that. See? So I see all of a sudden you're on the radar in Lake Charles, and your trajectory has been pretty interesting. I mean, you came to town, and if I'm not mistaken, you were with Arts and Humanities.
That's right. Yeah.
And then after that, you were in public relations at O'Carroll Group.
Yes.
Then City of Lake Charles.
Yes.
And now 1911. That's a pretty beautiful trajectory, in my opinion, because of where you're at now. I mean, it just seems like it's where you were headed.
When the stars align and you get to go to work doing the job that you knew you were meant to do and kind of prepared for, it feels really good. So the Arts Council, my background is public relations, and that's what I did in Newport Beach, California. Worked for a PR firm over there called Outside Eyes, and we had some really great celebrity clients. Paul Walker was somebody that I got to travel with.
Really?
Yeah, Fast and the Furious star, who's now tragically he was killed in an accident a couple of years back, but got to go with him to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Besides this story, I moved back to Lake Charles, and I get this job working in the arts, and Chuck Ellers and Casey Bolton kind of pulled me into that whole mix. They said, we really need somebody who can help market the Arts Council, fundraise for the Arts Council, put it on the map as far as Southwest Louisiana goes. So no idea about anything arts related. In fact, I remember myself at an art opening at 1911, and I found myself standing next to Mayor Randy Roach, whom I've just met first time, and he says, "You're the new Arts Council director. What do you think about this body of work?" Wow. I didn't even have words to describe what I thought the art. I was like, "It's really beautiful."
Hey,
I didn't know mediums. I didn't know technique. I didn't really know what they painted it on. It was really colorful. And so the words that I used probably sounded so elementary to him, and I think about that looking back and laugh. But yeah, worked at the Arts Council, took a dive in public relations in Lake Charles, and enjoyed that. Politics has always been an interesting dynamic for me, and I'm drawn to that. And so I went to work for Mayor Roach doing his public relations, and then stayed on with Mayor Nick Hunter doing public relations for him the first year. But this job doing PR and arts for the city of Lake Charles opened up, and I thought, that's absolutely what I want to do.
Yeah.
I enjoy PR, but it's a little draining for politics. Being beat over the head about drainage and sewage and trash pickup in streets every day is really not what I felt like I was meant to do. But promoting arts events and exhibits that really cause people to reflect and are a bright point in their day, put happiness in their life is really fun. And I think we're talking about, it's funny the way that our interview is shaping up. We're talking a lot about the way that kids develop and how art can influence them. And not too long ago, I was having a conversation with my friend Amanda White, and we were talking about all kids grow up with this ability or this desire to be artists. And somewhere along the way, I don't know if it's middle school, elementary school, high school, we start telling them they have to get a desk job. You need to make money.
Right.
Leave the creative side alone and start
you have to become a product, basically, a profitable product.
Yes.
Is what you need to become.
That's massively produced and an exact replica of the person before you.
Yeah.
And we were talking about what kids like to do. So they love to play house. Well, that's theater. That's pretending to be something that you're not. You're making these ideas up in your mind. They love to tell stories. They get in your truck on the way home from work. How was your day? And they're like, I saw a monster on the playground, and and it looked like this, and then this crab came to life, and it came and attacked me. And we unfortunately sometimes discourage them. We say like, don't fib, you didn't see a monster. Those are writers though, like in the making. They're using their own like creative passion to create this story in their head, and I wish that we would encourage that. Kids who love to draw and paint and work with Play-Doh, those are sculptors, those are painters and visual artists. And like I said, somewhere along the way, we start telling them, you need to learn Excel. You need to start developing a skill that you can get paid for, and we don't encourage them to explore that creativity, which is, it's kind of sad in a way.
It is. It's actually making me sad listening to you. No, I mean, because I understand. I do. I've those thoughts and feelings like that just sort of echo around inside my skull a lot, especially looking around when I hear those voices telling children that. It's hard to see.
Yeah, a kid loves to pull the pots and pans out of the kitchen cabinet and start playing the drums on the floor, and we say, "Oh, you're making a mess. Put that back up." But kids are really born very, very creative. They're all artists to a certain degree.
Yeah, you're talking about something I talk about on this show a lot, and if anybody's listened to every episode, they're probably going to get sick of hearing me say it, but I talk about creativity a lot as a force, and that's something I've believed for a long, long time, that just like love, I believe love is a force. I think it's something that's well, you may not be able to see it, but you see it manifest, right? Mm-hmm. You can feel it, and it's not just an emotion. I really believe that, and I believe creativity is the same way. Mm-hmm. And it tries to be born, and people are one of those ways that it tries to manifest constantly, you know. And some strange thing as adults, we want to tighten the knot on that and sort of subdue it and say fit into this other thing that's maybe not so creative. And that's hard. It's hard because I can look at my own life and see times where I've tied the knot off and let the flow of that creative energy sort of die or amputate that over time.
Right.
And I regret those things. I really do. And so that's one of the things in rearing a child. I definitely don't want to be that adult. But there's that question that people ask. So how do you live a fully creative, a life that's in service to the creative force? And still feed yourself. That's the thing that I think we got to change.
Sure.
I think we have to change. It's going to take a long time. I really do. But we have to build new structures and new vehicles for that.
When people follow their passions, they find a way to make it work for them because you're doing something that you absolutely love, and that shows. You can't create or authenticate something that's not you or not real. And you mentioned love. I got married a year and a half ago, and that was a big step for me.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thanks. And for me, that was coming out to all of my family and friends, and that was something that I really held back on doing for a long time because I was scared of the reaction that I might get. Certainly in Southwest Louisiana, we have a more traditional, conservative, outlook, and I was really afraid to do that. I was afraid that it would sever all of my ties with my family, that I would lose my career. But what I realized was that the opposite of that was me really inflicting a lot of self-pain on myself by not being who I truly was. And I tried to be different, tried to do something different. But when you allow yourself to be you and to be loved and to love and do what you desire, then you'll really have a liberating moment in your life where you go like, man, life is awesome and it's totally worth living. And if I can inspire other people to do that, I certainly want to. It's
very interesting, the timing of this visit, man. I got to tell you, my son is a gay boy. He's 15, and he came out to me when he was 13 years old. And it was a positive conversation. I mean, healthy, I would say. I don't know. I mean, his perception.
It's a little scary for you?
Not really. I think, Matt, I just sounds, I don't know if this is even the right way to say it, but my wife and I have just always had a feeling. Mm-hmm. Ever since he was very little. I mean, 2 years old, it was just, I will say I wasn't surprised.
Sure.
That's the best way to put it. I mean, I never thought of that as an issue because I just see him as my son, Jonah. Right? I mean, I don't look at him. Right. He doesn't look at me as his straight dad, right? Okay, he just looks at me as his dad. I look at him as my son. He's just a human being. And so it wasn't an issue, but I knew that it was hard for him because he was kind of being tortured at school, and he wasn't sure what was going on. It was just a lot of tearful. School was hard. Yeah. It's still hard, but it's not as hard as it was.
Yeah.
But I'll fast forward through all the pain and get to last night. He's on the student board for Truth, Facts, and Lies. And so Carrie Hankins, I don't know if you know her. Mm-hmm. So Carrie is asking the kids to write articles for the website. And she had asked me if Jonah would want to write one. And he was like, Dad, what should I write about? I said, well, write about something that you care about. And he said, well, I just want to write something about being a 15-year-old gay boy and what that life is like. So people understand things that they're not understanding, right?
Right.
And so I said, okay, And so we had like a 30-minute conversation. He said, I'm going to my room to write. Well, he sat in his room for like 2 hours last night, and then we went in his room and we read what he wrote. And I was like, Jonah, that's incredible. And he's like, yeah. And he's like, you got any critiques? And so we gave him some advice, creative writing tips and stuff like that. And he was just very happy. He felt like he got that out of his system. And he said, I can't wait to send this to Miss Carrie. Hearing what you just said about the fear and the worry, I just got to tell you, I know that the world it's hard here in Southwest Louisiana because he experienced what that's like. But and also as his family, we have too. But things are changing because you got a 15-year-old who feels, he was like, hey, I'm about to share this. It's not a secret.
Yeah.
But he feels comfortable and safe enough. And and he's able to subdue those fears to take a step out there like that and share things with his peers that they need to know.
Yeah.
And I think, man, I hope that can keep being the way things go. We're talking about changing this next generation. And I'm like, to have healthy kids who aren't eating themselves up inside and hiding things and hurting self-harm internally.
You 100%. Thanks for sharing that with me. I actually didn't know that about your son. And I admire him so much for doing that, because it's certainly something that I wasn't ready to do at 15. At 31, I was struggling with coming out. So I think that it's a path that everybody has to take on their own. But I do find it to be a most rewarding path, because you are letting yourself be yourself, and your heart and your soul and everything can find harmony and peace, in doing that. And I ask, were you scared? Not because I don't think that you would have any bad reaction to that. I ask that because I think for a parent, it has to be scary. Sure. Anytime that their child, is putting themselves in harm's way, and coming out does subject you to a little bit of pain and criticism. But but it's much better. I mean, and if you talk to a member of the LGBT community in their 50s or 60s, they say, God, the kids these days, they just got it made, because they,
right.
Back then they either didn't marry, or they got married, or tried to live a life that that they really couldn't get behind.
Well, I can only imagine, considering all the bullying and, oh my gosh, the mental torment, man. I mean, if you've ever been through that, then you know how that eats you up inside, and the things that people don't see. The parents that are sitting at the side of the school drop-off for 20 minutes trying to pep their kid up to get through their tears to get out of the car.
Yeah.
Every single day.
Yeah.
And the things they're doing, they're crying, when they're just people who just want to be like everybody else and enjoy the world like everybody else, and they don't understand why does this matter so much. That's hurt. That hurts you as a parent, and it can almost jade you. But I go back to those times and I go, what would happen if, on top of all of that your kid's going through, as a parent, then I reject my kid too? Mm-hmm. What in the world kind of gravity
Sure.
are you putting on a human psyche?
And that happens, and it really does happen. My parents weren't accepting at first, and that hurt. They've come around a little bit, and now what they tell me is, what kind of parents would we be if we didn't rejoice with our son whenever he was happy? And I think that to love your kid, without barriers or borders is a beautiful thing. I'm excited about the trajectory that the United States is in right now. I think that we are becoming a more kind people. Of course,
that's interesting to hear you say, because a lot of people wouldn't say that.
Yeah, and maybe they're looking at the 2 to 3 years that we're currently surrounding ourselves in. But over the course of time, I think consistently our trajectory has been up. I mean, if you look back to the early 1900s, and then to the civil rights movement, and then the human rights movement, and now I think there's a lot of religious persecution for people who are choosing religions that aren't within mainstream Christianity in America. But we are becoming more tolerant people, because I think we're learning that our differences are to be celebrated, and that's why I love the work that you've done with Culture Fest.
Oh yeah, Culture Fest, Pat Kelty, what a great event!
It's phenomenal, and how cool to go and learn firsthand about someone else's culture, their country, their fashion, their food, their customs and rituals from them. And whenever we get to talk about ourselves, it feels good. For one, we love bragging on something that we in our custom and our people do. but also to learn firsthand from them the way that they, celebrate life. And I think in so doing, it makes us a little bit more aware that the world is a great big place and diversity is fun. And I don't want to be surrounded by people who are just like me. I'd love to find friends who are far different from me and challenge my opinions on life, because I think that makes you a bigger person.
I totally agree. One of my favorite little treasures is that kaleidoscope behind you over there, and I keep it there to remind me of just what you said, that every time I pick that up, nothing changes. I'm not adding new pieces of glass to it. The components are all in there, but every time I pick it up, I don't care how many times I look at it, it looks different every single time, but it's beautiful every single time. And I like that, because I go, that's the world, right? I mean, you don't have to you don't have to take things out of it, and you don't have to put new things into it. Everything that's just sort of is, and you can find beauty whichever way you look at it.
That's
whichever
right.
direction you look.
Yeah. People have a very negative outlook on the country right now and the climate that we're in, the conversations that we can or cannot have right now, because I think that most people are speaking their mind more. They're getting it off their chest. They feel more comfortable expressing the views and rationale that they have. But and some of that is bringing up some very hurtful, negative thing. I'm not being naive or glass half full on that. I think that some very ugly, disgusting conversations are taking place in America right now. But I think that that's a very important part of us recognizing who we are so that we can move forward. Because now, racism doesn't just happen behind closed doors. It happens out in the open. And, it's going to take just a couple of people saying, like, we're not going to have those conversations anymore. We're not going to talk that way anymore. We're going to love people for who they are, despite their skin color, sexual orientation, beliefs, so on and so forth. And so I think that everyone is very empowered right now to speak their mind, but I think that that's an important part of healing. We've got to see what's under the rug before we can clean it out, I
have a question. So, I don't know what I would how I'd even answer this, but what do you think that is that makes people not love or accept or just be open to people as they are? What do you think that is that causes that?
Two things. One, it possibly is just fear of the unknown. Anything that's different from us, we reject immediately because it's scary,
Sure.
And two, I think the straight white man that we've put on a pedestal for a long time in America is being challenged. And so for some people, that's a little difficult to have their authority questioned. The fact that workplaces now are making honest efforts to hire more females, to decrease the pay wage gap is encouraging, in my opinion, because I think that we're trying to get our society to where it needs to be. And like I said, if we don't have those conversations that are sometimes difficult, then we don't know how we can move forward. So maybe fear of the unknown and challenging the status quo.
I that is probably what I would answer, at least in some version of that, because it reminds me of a conversation I had with an old friend of mine. We were actually sitting at this table, and I have an interesting thing in my life, of which, again, I've talked about on the show quite a bit, is that I call it like dual belonging. So I practice Buddhism, but I'm also a Christian. And that, to some people, go, that doesn't work. But it works for me, and it has. And so when I have conversations about that with someone who's maybe on one side of that story, and they say, "Oh, I don't know about that Buddhism stuff," and I'm like, "Well, you kind of just answered your own reason for the aversion. You don't know about it,
right?
And it's not that I'm trying to convince you that I'm right necessarily, because there isn't really a right to it. The conversation went like this. I started saying, "Well, here's some similarities between the two practices, right?" And after that conversation, he said, I guess all I ever knew about Buddhism is that he's a little fat guy at a Chinese restaurant. And I said, well, actually, that's not really even Buddha, but we've called it that. And so you realize there's just these layers and layers of just not knowing things.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why I'm really a huge advocate of taking the time to read things that are outside your comfort zone and take interest in things that seem a little strange, because you start to go, oh, once you pop the cap off, the package on the outside doesn't really always truly represent what's on the inside. So I think you're right. It's just some understanding and just educating yourself.
Big time. That you think about, like our military, our political system, like the perfect model is surrounding yourself with people who think differently than you, so that you can make sure that you're not just rushing into something blindly, but considering it from all different perspectives.
And I'm happy, I know it.
You've probably heard me mention filming videos, building websites, creating logos, or building brands on this podcast. Well, there's a good reason for that. I'm a brand builder, and my brand is Parker Brand Creative Services. My team and I have built countless brands in the Gulf Coast region, and a lot of our work in the travel and tourism industry is experienced across the country and honestly the whole world. We have our specialties: web, logo, package, and whole brand design, as well as video production and photography. But the reality is, we function as a full-service advertising agency to businesses that don't really mesh well with larger advertising agencies or just don't want to have in-house creative departments. But don't listen to what I say. Just go to our website, parkerbrandup.com, and take a look at what we do. We're a show it, don't say it team. Okay, you should definitely say it too, but you know what I mean. That's parkerbrandup.com. We think sideways, we push forward, and we'll get your brand up.
So take this, you've earned it, a melody and chorus.
I really loved whenever President Obama put Hillary Clinton on his first cabinet, because, I mean, she was everything that he was not, and probably believed ideologically different from him, but he wanted her as Secretary of State because I'm sure that she challenged, his outlook. And the same thing with this president. I think that he is purposefully trying to choose people who think differently from him, and hopefully taking that advice.
Yeah, no, I think that's hard to do. It's easy to the term echo chamber comes up. I mean, it's easy to sort of create that around yourself and only want to hear voices that sound like your own, and that just support your point of view. God, I've been proven wrong so many times just doing this show. I got a text from one of the listeners yesterday, which I really appreciated, honestly, and just let me know how much it means to them, but pointing out that they had listened to 2 episodes back to back, right? And we do this fishbowl thing, and the guests had both drawn the same question out of there, but their answers were like polar opposite. But at the same time, they're both good people doing good things in the community. So their path to getting there didn't look anything alike, but yet both had the point of view that their path was, that recipe was perfect. They needed that. So I think that's interesting. You just don't know what's going to be the catalyst for somebody, because we're all just so different.
Yeah, I'm a little worried about that fishbowl, because I find myself being very honest and open with you. Oran, you got a great presence about you that I'm just really talking openly, and I forget that we're recording this for
Well, it's not live, so we can cut. Somebody told me, I was the same person told me, said, I feel like I'm listening to people hanging around a campfire, which I really like.
It's exactly like that.
Yeah. Have you ever read the book Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance?
I'm not.
There's a word that comes up in that book, and it's kind of what the book is all about, and it's Chautauqua. And I'd never heard it until I read that book, but it was apparently a long time ago. That was how people gain new knowledge. They would have these big events called Chautauquas, and it would be about a particular subject, and you'd have lectures, and people would come up and read, and it was really a big movement that moved around the country. And I was like, wow, this is pretty fascinating. I've never heard of this. So people were having just what you said. They were having conversations and debates in a very healthy way, and they could bring new information to the table, like, pre-internet, I guess. You had to meet new people. And so it was a wonderful, they compared it to like revivals, almost like religious revivals, right? So a big tent up, and people would just go and listen to things from different cultures. And I was like, that's pretty interesting, but we don't really have that anymore. Now it's left your own devices to kind of go, well, I'm interested in that, let me go check it out on the internet, and who knows what you're going to get. And then you're losing potentially the human connection. So after reading that book again recently, I was like, I want this show, I think, to be kind of like that. People can bring whatever they want to the table. It's open door. I mean, who am I? I hope I learned something. Yeah. In the process.
Hearing different perspectives and the synergy just that comes along too from having different perspectives at the table is kind of enamoring. That was the beauty, and we can talk about work stuff later, but that was the beauty in the quality of life task force that kind of emerged about 3 or 4 years ago from the chamber. It was really finding out what people's passions are in the community and trying to build those projects. There wasn't like the task force never set out with 1 through 10, this is what we're going to accomplish in the first year. We just kind of tried to hear, what are we missing, and how can we get to work on that. And the dog park was a beautiful product of that task force. Just interested people who live downtown in a Sharpton district, along the lakefront, they wanted a place to be able to run their dog. And generally in that area, you've got smaller yards, but they might not be fenced in. And so in a matter of weeks, we raised $45,000 and built a dog park on city-owned land. And now it's really cool to pass and see that thing used
and now
all
it's
the
just
time,
part of the whole
the fabric of the
now.
community.
Yeah.
And an amenity too. I mean, in my opinion, we should have it on the blue DOTD signs. We say dog park, get off right here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're going to draw interest to the area. It's funny. I was just having this conversation with my wife. I said, when you're looking to move to an area, you want to know that there's certain things in place. You know, you want to know the character of the people that live there, right? And that's not always easy to determine. I mean, they may have all the amenities, but the people themselves may not be who you want to be around for the rest of your life. And I was thinking about this show. I said, a year from now we'll have 100 episodes. I said, so if you wanted to know what an area was like, you've got a place where you can go meet 100 people who live there and get a good vibe of what the character of the community's like. I said, that's kind of cool to take a deep dive instead of just a headline, and have to search that out for yourself. But yeah, I think a lot of times when I talk to people, in fact, recently online, there was a conversation that I got involved in, which honestly, it's double-edged for me. I wish I hadn't have gotten in it, and then I'm also glad I did because I learned some things. But
aren't that all of them?
A lot of them, yeah. I try to avoid them, honestly, unless it's positive. I've tried to retool my whole online experience.
Find the good news, man.
Yeah, man. I mean, I can't do that. And I'm not one of those where it's like, oh, no, I don't want that in my head. I'm a realist. I see what's out there, but I don't want that to just be all I see, right? Because it can be.
It can dominate your
trash on top of the water, so to speak. And and
then you focus on that, and that's all that you see. It's like driving down the road and you see litter, and you start to take that in, and then all of a sudden that's all you see is litter.
Litter everywhere.
You forget that there's really beautiful flowers around it, and there's green trees and stuff. But God, you're just focusing on the negative, and it can take over your mind.
Yeah, and it's interesting, man. I mean, you just made me think of something I wrote down about you as well. I go for a little morning walk every morning, and I guess one of my practices is trying to find the beauty in something that maybe is disregarded or seen as ugly. So a lot of times it could be, I was walking the other morning and there was cracks in the sidewalk and there were these little red, just micro fine mossy things growing there. I have no idea what they are. I'd have to ask somebody who knows something about that. And it's probably just a weed, but I stopped and stared at those. And I thought, man, and I got down on the ground and looked really close, and there was just all this detail and just this little stuff growing in the cracks. And so I thought, how often, just like you said, do I look around and I get hinged on one thing, like the trash, or get hinged on things that are obviously beautiful, like a flower. But what about all the little things in the cracks, I say all that because I was going through your Facebook page, and you posted about kintsugi. Which is strange timing because my wife and I have been talking about that, and I had bought her a piece of pottery that was repaired that way. And I read your post about it, and it really touched me, man. I mean, it was just, I don't see a lot of people talking about it, but for us, we have cracks, right? I mean, everybody does.
Yes.
And so often, I think it's running from suffering is the answer to suffering, and I've come to believe that that's just not it. I think that it's almost the golden thread, right, that runs through my life is those pains and how they've shifted me.
Yeah, it really is. Not only running from suffering, but also we try to mask that too. We don't want people to know our flaws and our breaks and our stress fractures. And that's what's really cool about that Japanese art form is that they place value in items that are much used. We don't put our china up in the cabinet and only bring it out for Christmas. That's not valuable to their culture. But things that are used often daily, by us are the objects with which they place value. And so that's why you can imagine their pottery, their plates, it gets broken often. And the fact that they glue it back with this gold dusted powder that really emphasizes and highlights the stress fractures is beautiful to me, because I think as people, we make it through something, and it was a big, and we feel very proud of ourselves. And rather than looking at the people who behind us maybe haven't made it through that same trial yet, or trying to give someone a hand up, we become very proud. It's our natural instinct to go like, yes, now look at these muscles.
Right.
And rather than helping the people behind us or talking openly about that struggle, about that trial, we try to just mask it and say, I'm going to glue this with transparent glue so nobody can see it.
Right.
But instead, they glue it with that golden glue and really give value to those breaks. And in essence, that break becomes a part of them. I think it's very, very cool.
Yeah, I'd say it's cool and beyond. I get emotional when I'm listening to you talk about that because, yeah, there's people in my life that you just described that perfectly, where it's easy to look at someone else who's failing at something or who's having a hard time getting through something and going, well, they just need to buck up. I'm okay now. And to not go get yourself back into that space and look at your golden repaired crack, right? And go, hey, you know what? I'm gonna put a hand out because I was there and I'm gonna help them mend that. That's the gold. That's what the gold's for.
Right.
You
right.
know?
Totally. And you know what? Lose our pride and remember where we came from. Sometimes you do just need to buck up. Sometimes people, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. But there are also times when people really just need a hand, and we can provide that to them if we're not so haughty that we think, I made it through that already.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. I mean, there's so many times in my life where I know somebody's helped, where people have helped me. I don't know. I try to remember that, especially when a lot of it has to do with a person's attitude, I think. I think when we sense that somebody's ungrateful, the first reaction that I see most of the time is, well, I'm not doing anything for them anymore. They don't appreciate it. And I have to take a second and go, okay, well, have I ever acted like that? And yeah, I have. I may not have even realized it, but I was probably ungrateful and blew past a gift someone gave me or some assistance someone gave me, whether it was just listening to me.
Sure.
Sometimes I can be pretty burdensome because I like to talk, and share. And so I said, that somebody lent me their ears, and I really didn't. I didn't realize the blessing that was, right? And so I come off maybe as gruff and ungrateful. So I don't know. I try not to look at people who are being ungrateful and just like have that immediate reaction, where it's like, well, they're just being ungrateful. I'm not helping them anymore.
Yeah.
Because that's most of the time, that's just some kind of a veneer.
Sure. That makes two of us. I've certainly felt like that before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you some other questions.
Sure.
What do you think is the value of community involvement? Because I know you started out in PR, but now you've moved into being involved in the community, right? What's the value of that to you?
The reward of community involvement is truly making the place that you live better for you and for your family and for your friends. That's why I'm having so much fun at the new gig. To credit, Mayor Nick Hunter, he did establish a Department of Cultural Affairs, and Randy established it, but Nick put Central School and 1911 Historic City Hall and all of our events and exhibits under that department. So that's what I'm working with now, and what we're trying to do is really find purposeful uses for each building. So you've got Central School Arts and Humanities Center and 1911 Historic City Hall, and both of them are art centers. They have maybe competing missions in a lot of people's minds. They don't understand what one does and what the other. What we are wanting to establish is making Central School really a place where art is produced, where you go to learn something new. So theater classes, art classes, music lessons. There's a woman in there who teaches guitar and vocal lessons, writing, the symphony, the community band, the Mardi Gras Museum, all of those things where you can really learn about a culture and learn a new trick are at Central School. 1911 is going to be moving forward our permanent exhibition space. And so on the third floor, we're hosting these traveling exhibitions. And unfortunately, I'm going to admit that a lot of people, the last time their visit into the building was in 2006 when we had Titanic.
Really? I remember that, actually.
All of a sudden, I'm thinking, that was a decade ago. That was the last time that you came in. But we're doing a lot to get more people into the building. So the third floor will be traveling exhibitions. These are the major Smithsonian level quality exhibitions that travel around the country. And then our second floor is going to be a home for local artists, and the first floor, an artisan's co-op. And we really want to value the work of local artists and be able to showcase their work as well, support them being able to sell their product. And one of the things that we're doing to get more people at the building is adding value with additional programming to our exhibits. So just for instance, we're opening the sculpture museum that's brought to us by the LSU Museum of Art in May, June, and July on the third floor. It's like these 9-foot tall metal pieces of sculpture.
Yeah.
And it highlights the history of jazz. So one of them is shaped like a piano.
That
one of them shaped
super cool,
like a musician. They're going to be heavy as hell to get up the stairs, but it's really cool, and I think the community is going to enjoy it. Well, in order to add value to that, we're adding a couple of jazz lessons. Jay Ecker and his group is coming in. They're going to teach some classes. We're having an opening jazz concert on the night of the reception so that you can be amongst this really beautiful body of work, but also like hearing jazz music and kind of the inspiration for the process. And we're doing that with all of our exhibits. Right now, we've got one that's on display called Nature, Tradition, and Innovation, and it's the Japanese ceramics exhibit.
Oh, yeah.
And so to supplement that, we've had a Japanese feng shui class. We've had a sake tasting, and we're having an ikebana arrangement class that's coming
Really?
up. Yeah, so you really can delve into this culture and kind of learn more about it.
That's really cool, man.
So even if you don't appreciate art or ceramics, you can come in and take a class on the culture of that exhibit and learn a little bit more.
I like that. I like the way you're thinking with that. I mean, that gives you that multidimensional approach to every one of the exhibits, right?
Sure. And 2 Saturdays ago, we had the feng shui class. We put out 15 chairs because we were worried that it was just going to be me and the staff there listening to the speaker that we brought in from Lafayette, who volunteered, by the way, to do that. But we ended up having 125 people come.
Holy cow, man. That's awesome. That's a great sign.
It was on a Saturday afternoon, too, in Lake Charles. So we're really wanting to do what we can to get more foot traffic in the door. We're also extending our hours in the summer. We're going to start a policy where we're open till 6 p.m. Right now, we're only open till 5. And
so a lot of people get off if they could stop by.
That's right. You want to make an early dinner date downtown, you can stop at the museum on your way, or if you want to stop at the museum on your way home from work, you can do that. We're going to extend hours on the weekend and really just doing everything that we can to bring more people in the door. There's a lot of events that happen right on our front step. So downtown at sundown, every May and June, we plan that event. It happens on the front step. We close Ryan Street down for that. Rouge et Blanc is going to move back downtown this year.
Is it?
And this year, for the first time, the Winter Beer Fest that Nick Vallone and Sarah Lasher and those folks put on, that's going to be on our front lawn.
Oh, wow.
And so what better if you got 1,000 people on your front lawn? Why not open the doors? And we've not done that in the past. So while you're there,
so I didn't realize that. So it's closed during those events typically.
Okay. So people just come and they have a good time. They sample beer, food, wine. They listen to music on our front lawn, which is great. But why not open those doors and get people moving into the building and experiencing something that maybe they haven't seen before?
Yeah, and I think extending those hours, it just makes me think of something that I've in the last year tried to do. It's having a wading pool. When we have filth on our feet or you get out of a pool, you kind of have. We used to keep a little kiddie pool outside. You wash your feet off before you go in to get all the grass or whatever off. And I'm maybe oversimplifying the way I think about it, but during the day when you're busy and you're dealing with deadlines and there's all these stressors at work, I really need a wading pool moment before I go into my home, because I'm gonna carry all that mess with me into the front door. And so what I've tried to do is make time. Then for me, it's as simple as just lighting a candle and an incense stick and just saying a mantra or some prayers for 10 minutes, and it gets my mind rebooted. But what a wonderful thing if you could just drive on your way home and go, I'm gonna stop, I'm gonna look at some art and sanitize my mind, and it kind of gets you focused on something completely different than that day.
It's
a healer.
It certainly would do that, but I've never thought about that process before. Kind of just decomposing and or decompressing and allowing you to sanitize your mind before carrying all that baggage into your house. I love that. I've not heard that before.
Well, you know why I do that though? Because I'm typically pretty tightly wound, right? Mm-hmm. I'm both things, like most people. You're two things. I mean, I prefer to be at peace and at calm, but the nature of the job I do isn't that way. It seems like it would be because it's creative, right? But it's highly stressful because of tight deadlines and demanding, the world's demanding. So you have to get kind of twisted up in that knot.
Yes.
And what I've noticed for me is I'm going to keep winding that into my house all the way up to bedtime if I don't take a minute to let that spin out. Kind of made me think, I have a music box that I'm really fond of, and that music box is what made me think of that. It would unwind, and I like to listen to it to kind of take a pause during the day. And so as it was unwinding one day, I thought, I'm going to back this story up. That music box is very valuable to me because it usually sits at a place that's pretty sacred to me. But it was out in the weather. And recently, I decided to, instead of leaving it out there, I'm going to take it home, because I started noticing every time I would go back and play that music box, that it worked a little slower. And I was like, I wonder why. All the parts are here. I never really considered that there's something going on inside that music box that's not quite right. So I brought it home and I took it all apart, and it was just rusted all up inside. You couldn't see it from the outside, but the guts were rusted up. So I took it all apart and I oiled it up, and it works perfectly. And I was explaining to my wife, I said, do you know how a music box works? And she was like, no, you wind it up. I said, right. I never knew what the mechanism was that makes the whole thing work. So there's this metal band inside that rolls up as you tighten it. And if you ever hear someone tell you don't overwind a music box, what happens is, now I know that metal band will snap off if you overwind it, and that's why I don't ever play again. And I said, there's a lesson in there about that. One, what things look like on the outside aren't always what they look like on the inside. And slowly, if you don't take care of what's going on, your music's not going to play.
Yes.
Right? So a little maintenance goes a long way. And then two, staying wound up like that is just leaving that metal band inside that device under stress constantly. And eventually, even if you don't overwind it, the thing that's holding it in there is going to break. Mm-hmm. And so it kind of got me thinking about unwinding and how valuable that is, even if it's just a moment at the beginning and the end of the day, because I have to have something to look forward to like that, because the middle of the day isn't like that. If I don't have that, then you're just going to fill your life with days with no lights in it almost.
I really, really like that concept, and I've not thought about it in that way before, but we've got to be more strategic about carving out just a little bit of time for ourselves. And now that you're saying it, it comes to mind that I notice the days that I go to the gym after work, I come home a much better person.
Yeah, you're at the end, right?
I've unwound. I've ran out some stress. I'm a new person. And I think that we need to be more strategic in making that little bit of time just for ourselves, so that we're not bringing all the baggage into the house. Like the one thing that I don't want to do every day is come home and just give my family what's left of me.
What's left? Well, that's a good way to put that.
I'd love to give them the very best of me. And so if we make time for ourselves somewhere in between work and the house and allow that adjustment period, I think that's a really good approach. I need to do better at that.
I do too. I really do. I mean, because I'm guilty, and I wish I could say I do it every day, because I could make it sound like I do. But there's days when you go, well, I'm just too busy for that. But the value in 10 minutes of time like that can just eliminate and erase, maybe not the full stress of the day, but it can begin the process. I think art works like that. If I like Brimstone Museum, it's right here. I mean, it's on my way home. So if it were open later, and I could go, hey, I can stop here for 15 minutes, right? Yeah. Now the reason I can't stop for 15 minutes is because I know Tom, and I'm going to get in a conversation with him, and I'll be there for 2 hours because I like Tom, right?
9 p.m.
Yeah, I'm where are you at? I'm still at Brimstone talking to Tom, because we'll start talking about comic books and movies, too. But no, I mean, as somebody, a casual visitor, I think that would be just a great way to unwind.
Yeah. Tom has a fantastic operation over here, and I have such a great amount of respect for him. In fact, he's been at Brimstone since I first moved to Lake Charles. I was working at the Arts Council, and we got to partner on a couple of different projects. But we're making an active effort for he and I to talk more often and regularly about ways that we can promote some cross partnerships between Historic City Hall in Lake Charles and Brimstone Museum in Sulphur. Even planning some exhibits that kind of spin off of each other, to where you'd see one in Sulphur and then you got to go across cross the bridge to get to Lake Charles. Now that's assuming you can get across the bridge.
Yeah, we're in a different situation now. Right. No, you're right.
Yeah. I taught a class on event planning not too long ago, and I was like, one of the things you got to consider, man, is time of day. Like if you're planning an event at 5:30 in Lake Charles and you know that most of your residents are coming from Sulphur, you might not have a great turnout.
It's true. You had a presentation. Now you're a part of this the new public relations professionals group, right?
Yeah.
What's the title of that group?
It's Southwest Louisiana Pros, but Pros is short for public relations officers.
Yeah.
And
who started that? Was it Megan?
It was.
Yeah. Okay.
Megan Hartman called me, and she wanted to put together kind of a network of public relations professionals that could, one, I shouldn't say this on air, but vent about media and all the crazy questions that you get from them, and two, kind of talk about how to keep our tools sharpened as public relations professionals, trying to keep up with new technology. If you're planning your event or your public relations strategy is designed the same way that it was in the 90s, if you're employing the designs that you did in the 90s and you're pulling those same designs out of the hat in 2019, you probably need to get out of the business or work to reinvent yourself for your work, because we've got new artificial realities and virtual realities and technology that just makes the way that we run things so much more different.
Yeah, you had a presentation title that I thought was interesting. It was the 7 things that you 7 event mistakes. Yeah.
These are the 7 mistakes that I learned the hard way. In fact, one of those I'll share with you. It was related to the public relations firm that I work for in Newport Beach. So I said the number one rule in event planning is to find out what your boss's or your company or client's objective is for the event. If it's education, stick with that. If it's networking, stick with that. If it's promoting a new product, then stick with that. One of the first mistakes that I made in the industry was we were connecting Paul Walker with another client of ours, the Billfish Foundation. So what do agencies do? A lot of times they make their clients work well together to benefit each other. We were matching them up. So the Billfish Foundation, which is this nonprofit out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, was actively working to advocate for their legislators to adopt policies that protected swordfish, billfish.
Okay.
Really low profile. So we thought by putting Paul Walker on their board, it would elevate their profile in the media, and it would be good for Walker because, all of a sudden the media goes like, man, he's not just surfing and acting and making money.
He's a human. He cares. Right.
He's getting involved in good causes. So we were going to Florida to connect the two for his first board meeting, and the account manager right above me got fired, and so I got put on that job 2 days ahead of time, and I had really no time to prepare. But my boss tells me, or my boss's boss tells me that he's going to give me an $8,000 budget to put on an event, and so I put on a jam on event, man. I was so proud. It was really good. Like the cocktails were flowing, there was great background music, the linens, the flowers, there was a program, everything was on point. And I'm coming back into my office going like, my boss is going to give me a raise. Nailed it. And he goes, well, what happened with the press, the publicity? There was you might as well not have even planned the event. I didn't realize he wanted me to invite reporters. He wanted stories out of this event. He didn't want the two, Paul Walker and the board, to get to know each other. That would have been a good byproduct. But he wanted stories to roll out in the newspaper,
how
radio.
It looked was more important than how it was.
Exactly. Which isn't the most noble of causes, but had I known that, I would have made sure we had lots of reporters there. So number one, in event planning, always make sure that you know what the objective of the event is.
Yeah, no, that's very good, because I hear that even from our perspective with advertising. People wonder why nobody's at the event. I'm like, well, you're putting, I guess, the message out there, but you're not getting any of the press. You're not making a splash with the media, and that's super important if you want people to pay attention. They have to know about it. They don't want to have to find out about it secondhand.
Yeah. Speaking of making a splash, you're making a heck of a splash over here, man. You are owning advertising in Southwest Louisiana.
Wow, nobody tells me that.
And your design is top notch. You can recognize your design.
Really?
Yeah.
I hear that, but I guess I have, my son says it.
It's
course,
obvious.
Well, that's good to know. We're modest. I don't know. I think that might be just maybe my own personality. I've never been one to go stand up and get an award. I always make this joke that most of the time I'm not wearing the right clothes to go to the thing that would require that anyway. Because honestly, I'm a worker, and I like being a worker, and I don't like just being behind the scenes. I like having my hands in it. So if there's filming to be done, I see you at events, I usually have a camera. I like being a worker. I like being on that side of it. So I do appreciate that compliment, though. A lot of people don't even know that they'll see brands. They don't know that we did them.
There's some great designers, some great photographers in Lake Charles.
Oh, there are.
There really, really are. But your work stands out. It's definitely among the top.
Appreciate that, man. I really do. We've tried really hard. We care. I really do. What we do doesn't always leave our place without going through the committees, so a lot of times what you see out in the public ultimately isn't maybe where it started. I mean, that's anything. Sure. That's the business of advertising and design, but
the evolving process based on the client's
yeah. I mean, I had somebody the other day, we recently did a project where the client had very little input. They didn't change a lot, and it's rare.
Go ahead.
It's very rare. And so I got a message just saying thanks so much, and they were worried that the process might have been difficult because they thought they were changing a lot. And I was like, oh my gosh, absolutely not. And I told my wife about it. I said, I guess our perspective is we're used to dealing with committees and large teams. And truthfully, and I mean this in the most loving way possible, but the way I have to say it is most of the people on those committees aren't qualified to be making design decisions or marketing decisions a lot of times. But they're the client, so you have to make those changes, unless you want to be fired, and we don't. So we're used to that, and so we thought this was like a slick runway, and they were like, oh, was it difficult? Will it be hard to work with? I was like, absolutely not. It was as nice as it's been in years.
That's the best.
Yeah, it's nice to get a win and a client to email you. In this world, I think encouragement, we're circling back around, even at 44 years old, okay, encouragement goes a long way. And that particular client took time to write me an email. It was 2 sentences long, but it was, y'all were a pleasure to work with. We absolutely love the design. Thank you so much for taking on this project.
Yeah.
The end. It wasn't poetry, but I ran around the office and said, we got an email, a compliment, because we don't get that kind of stuff from the committees. And I'm not saying that like shame on you committees, but I think it's very easy to get again caught in the winding of the thing, to where it's the band's so tight we forget to stop and go.
We're humans. Yeah. It's not just a transaction. Some gratitude really goes a long way.
Oh, it goes so far. Yeah. So far. I mean, just inviting someone to an event or something, where it's like, hey, I find that with us, we work as an extension of other people's teams. And that's the thing that I have, that has become a role that I didn't think I was going to have to take with my team, is keeping morale high, because so often we're like sort of the basement. We work in the basement, right? And so you'll see the committee or team you're working with go to a thing and get sort of the accolades of the work that you've done, but we're sort of the team in the basement.
Right.
So I have to keep their morale up and go, hey, you did a good job. Hey,
that was you.
That work was awesome. I know that person up there is, wearing the pantsuit, getting the glass or whatever, but they're getting it because of what you did. And you are creative, and you are, because that matters to creative people. For more sure. than people realize. Just that. I mean, they want their paycheck, obviously. But it matters to them that they're doing a good job.
That was one of the things that I struggled with at an agency, was really identifying with one particular brand, or taking ownership of an event, or connecting with a product or a company in the way that you do when you just work directly for them. And for instance, you talk about the design, but I felt the same way with like planning the event.
Oh, I believe it.
Planning an event and it coming out really successful, and then the company like takes joy and satisfaction in that. At the end of the day, that's the objective, and that's what you wanted to happen. Right. But at the same time, you're like, oh, I wish I could have celebrated with them because that was really good.
I know.
And I planned that.
That's exactly, that's it. There's no waiting pool. And that's the speed at which things go now. I don't know if it's always been this way, but because I've only been working in the industry like 21 years. But it seems like the pace is just exponentially. It doubles every year, and so that there's no waiting pool out of a project. We'll do a big branding project where we're feeling it, we're going, this is going to be good, this is going to be good, everything launches, the brand's out there, and then maybe in a week you're seeing the TV, you see the new logo, the whole thing is slick, and that company's off to the races. There's nothing said, transaction, you're on to the next project.
Yeah.
So there's no like,
That's a great way to
it.
describe that.
Yeah, you don't sit in it for a little while and go, hey, we did a good job. You know, you don't get to have that. And I think that's a human thing. I think we just need that to find the energy for the next project.
It's like you give the company the baton to run the last leg of the race.
Yeah.
It's like you ran the first 7, but then you just passed that baton off, and you really would love to be there at the finish line, not to gloat or to take joy and satisfaction, but just like to experience the end of the race.
Yeah. That's for me. I've mentioned this on the show a few times, that's partly why I like doing work for nonprofits, because I can see their work in the community and how it's affecting people. And so when you're seeing a brand that you worked on for a nonprofit, you kind of just see that your skills and your talents and all the things you've worked towards are actually doing something good in the community. Now, I say all that and know that doing nonprofit work is usually free. And yeah, I mean, that's a tax write-off to a certain extent, but you can't keep your doors open doing that kind of work. So it's a little bit of both. You know, I want to do that work because it is rewarding to my soul, you know, but you can't do enough of that.
Doesn't keep the lights on.
Yeah.
To credit Public Relations Officers, the PROS organization that we're a part of, what we're going to do this year is choose one nonprofit. And we're going to take the expertise of all these public relations professionals in town and really center in on focus on their efforts. And so, imagine having Dana Keel and at Citgo and all of the bank professionals, all the hospital people who really embody the work of public relations professionals. Imagine being able to have all 20 of those working on your nonprofit, objective or goal. It's kind of be a neat experience for that nonprofit.
It's interesting. Many years ago, I had this idea whenever all those home makeover shows were out, Extreme Home Makeover or Trading Spaces and stuff like that. And I had told Michelle, I said, what would be cool is if we could do something like that where we had sort of a process where we could select a brand that needed a makeover, a little small mom and pop shop that really didn't have the money to do that, to have that slick logo and to have, copy written for their business and everything designed, and do some kind of make a whole thing out of it where they do little videos about their business and see where they're at and what they're doing, and then we come in and just do all that work for free and just really help them kickstart it. But you get busy and the idea goes
deadlines.
Right.
I would love to see that though. And then you're for the big unveil, you're move that truck. The truck just moves out of the way.
The whole team walks out and they're in uniforms that you design. Yeah, we had this whole idea, and it would give you an opportunity to do work to really show yourself at the top of your game. Because like I said, a lot of what a company like ours or a little team like ours is doing, you're not seeing the top of the game. And that's not to mean that the client input isn't valuable, but you don't ever see anything that just leaves here the way we want it to leave.
Yes.
There's always some kind of shift. And then a lot of times, I think brand commitment is difficult for people. Committing to a plan is difficult because of the pace of the world, right? So for me, branding takes time. You need to let it soak for a while, and you got to let things play out a little bit and give it a chance to find its wings and its legs. And the impatience is out there, and people won't give a plan a full chance to really do something. So before you really get to see it out there the way it should be and take flight, it's being changed, right? And fear. It's fear. There's a lot of fear that sets in. Well, we're not saying enough, or this picture, we're worried about this photo, or I don't know, the logo's too small, or those things like that, and you start to see things shift over time.
From the original vision, what it was going to be. I can see that. And just we live in a 24/7 news cycle, and things are constantly moving 1,000 times a minute, and people want to change the look, and let's abandon that and let's scrap it and let's change it next year, and look at Coca-Cola, owning it, man.
Right.
Not touching that brand or changing the design or font or anything like that. They're just owning it. And and maybe we don't give it enough time. I'm hoping some of the things that we've designed will stay put for a little while, so I can, there are brands around that I know the names of the original designers, and I'll go, hey, they did that, and they did this one and this one too. And they've stuck around, and I hope we're around long enough, or at least just alive long enough to see those things where somebody can go, they did that 20 years ago, and it's still the same. It's even better today. It's like a fine wine. It gets better with age. Right.
They don't feel the need to change it. Well, that's something I've always said. I want whatever we do when we're doing design, if we're allowed to do it, that it's timeless, that, we're not designing you into a corner. you know, because that's the worst thing. It kind of goes back to what you said about using what you did in the 90s in 2019. You know, when we're doing design work, I mean, you know it's going to change, but especially with the first thing, the logo, I don't want it to look dated in 3 years. You know, that's so important to me that it's simple enough to where it's going to stand.
Keeping up.
Yeah.
But the basic elements are still the same.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, you can have some fun with it. And like Coca-Cola, they have fun with their brand, but the core ultimately
Still
doesn't
there.
change. Yeah.
Right.
Man, this has been fun. But now I've got to...
Come on.
the fishbowl. Now, there's something new. You're the first to do something with this. I had questions in here from guests and some questions that we had wrote. But oddly enough, there were 150 questions in there. And people kept drawing the same ones, even after 24 interviews.
Okay.
And it was still drawing.
So reach to the bottom?
Well, I added something to it. And this is not a plug. They did not pay me to do this, but there's this deck, and it's awesome. It's called Wordsmith Deck. And it's for writers, and it had a deck of cards with the best questions.
Oh, wow.
And so what I did is I've actually seeded the fishbowl. It has the original 150 questions and then some, and this deck. So you can draw little paper scraps or from the deck. 3.
All right. First question. What's something you've let go that once meant the world to you? Ooh,
It's a hard one. That's a big question.
it is. I'm going to say for the most part, I have really, really worked on letting go of what other people think of me.
Wow.
I probably at one point lived my life in a manner that whenever I laid my head on the pillow at night, I wanted as many people to agree with me or adore me or want to hang around me. That meant satisfaction to me. And I think over the last 3 years specifically, I've made a very strategic, conscientious effort to live my life in a way that, number one, pleases God. Number one, makes me proud of who I am, and number three, just really helps benefit our community. And sometimes, like we were talking about earlier, it's not the most popular approach. Why are things the way they are? Well, it's because they've been that way for so long, and I really want to challenge that status quo. And sometimes it's not popular with people or with politicians. You get a lot of challenge from elected officials who think that don't shake it up too much, don't make any movement, because people are going to expect that. Or, well, my opinion is if we get people to reach for higher dreams and believe in greater things for their community, then what's wrong with that?
Yeah.
And sometimes, keeping the community happy or not wanting too much for themselves can be the goal of, our current elected officials. I'm not talking about Nick Hunter. Nick Hunter is a fantastic guy to work for. And I really have learned so much from him. Also not talking about Randy Roach, just for the record. I don't want anybody to start reading into that too much. I've enjoyed working for both of those guys tremendously, but I'm impressed with the things that Nick has done in a very short amount of time. With the Port Wonder project, that's going to really change the landscape of our lakefront and bring a lot of cars off the interstate. But also with Mallard Cove, we were, as a city, struggling with what to do with that golf course for a long time. And he took 3 community partners, Chenault, Morganfield, and the city, and put together a public-private partnership that really works for all of them. So out of the deal, the city's going to get a better golf course that we're not spending so much on maintaining, because the old course was becoming quite costly to maintain. And we're not having to pay for it. Chenault is getting more land next to them that they can grow into and expand, and all they're having to do is pay for the new golf course. So they get adjacent property that's going to create jobs and build infrastructure. And then Morganfield gets this fantastic amenity in their neighborhood, and all they had to do was donate the land for it. So more people will want to live in Morganfield because there's a golf course next door.
Sure.
So it's really one of those triple partnerships that works best for everybody involved and doesn't cost taxpayers anything. He's been really good at his job so far.
That's great.
I'm enjoying working for him.
I'm glad to hear you say that. I wonder how many people out there really sit and think about that and look at it that way. And hearing you present it that way, it's going to give that information to people and go, I never really considered that.
Yeah, we were so upset, worried about pleasing the golfers and things like that, and we thought there's not going to be one solution that we come up with that they're going to get behind. And ironically enough, the golfers are the number one supporters of this project because they're going to get a brand new course out of it, and rates aren't going to go up. So that's it's a good thing for all of us involved.
Yeah. I got to ask you,
Sure.
you said 3 years ago is when this happens. I mean, you said when you begin to let this go. Mm-hmm. What was it? I mean, what shifts in you to make, because I mean, I understand what that's like, and I had a similar time in my life where that happened, and I know why it was that way for me, but what changes for you?
Letting go of fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of being rejected, fear of people not loving you or wanting to be around you. When you let go of that and truly just start to go after the things in your life that bring you passion and joy and help others, for me, that's what changed.
Yeah, I get that. You know, when I was younger, I had a lot of those same fears. Probably, I mean, how old are you, Matt?
34.
Okay, probably up until, I think for me it was... probably divorce was the catalyst. I got divorced around I was 30 years old, and that shook some things loose, you know, for me, where I was like, look, I need to be a more intentional human being. I think was what I kind of made the decision. I was like, I can be intentionally who I am, because I was only who I was in the marriage, because I got married so young. And so when things started to break, you know, again, gluing something back together with gold.
Yes.
You know, I had to make myself that glue, right? I had all these shattered pieces, and I had kids that I had to take care of, and I had all this, you know, the career I had to rebuild. And so I couldn't do that by accident. I needed to be more intentional with myself. I needed to be, think about my trajectory, you know, a little harder. And so, yeah, it changed things for me, and I had to not be afraid of who I really was, what I believe, you know, let those things steer me and not worry so much what other people would say. Especially for me, what I believe in my spiritual life has always been sort of a sore spot and the brightest spot, because I've always been afraid in Southwest Louisiana to be honest about the way I live my life in my spiritual practices, because I never could find one place to put my feet. I still haven't found that, to be honest, but that's okay. I've learned that that's okay, you know.
Yeah, I see you as a very genuine, authentic person, and I think that when you allow others to see you for that, it's infectious. It's easy to want to know more about and to want to get to know you further. And sometimes when we try to create this inauthentic person that we think other people want to see, it comes across as very fake and manufactured, and really just kind of pushes away people sometime, and we miss out on interacting and finding those friends in our life that really support us and help us grow.
Yeah, well, it's like trying to build God, it makes me think of the scarecrow I built in my garden years ago. I ended up spending more time trying to keep that scarecrow from falling apart than I did taking care of the garden, and then the garden ended up falling apart in the process. You know what I mean? I was worried about the irony of it. I spent all this time building the scarecrow, and really, a glove would fall off or his head would fall off, and I would spend all this time messing with that, and I don't even have that garden anymore.
When in actuality, a decapitated scarecrow might have been really
might
scary.
have been really better. So yeah, it's kind of how it is when you're making these sort of this facade or trying to build up to something that the public's supposed to see. It goes back to what I said about not having the right clothes, you know?
Yes.
I don't, that's not who I am. You know, I can pretend, but.
Yeah. Be yourself.
Yeah.
Best way to live life. Okay, this one's a paper. What's the biggest joy thief that you're aware of in your life? Biggest joy thief that I'm aware of in my life. This is going to sound... not having the resources to just go and do whatever I'd like to do.
There you go.
I'm not even going to limit that to money, because of course if we had all the money in the world we could travel and see everything.
Yeah.
That of course would bring joy into our life, but also like the talent and ability. In my mind, I'm a really good drummer, like a rock star drummer. But I've never played the drums in my life.
But in your mind,
yeah,
you can rock the drum.
Yeah, so I don't have the resources to be. I want to. I really want to. If anybody knows a drum teacher, they can put me in touch with. I would love to. I feel like I was born to be a drummer, but
I can relate to that with guitar.
Really?
Yeah, no, for real. Like for 20, 30 years, I've been like, man, I watch people play guitar, and in my head, I can see myself playing guitar. I can sing, but I can't. I've always gone, man, I'm just missing that guitar. So last year, I bought a guitar. Started doing guitar lessons, but what I have found is I've learned 5 chords. That ain't a lot. but I don't have the time, man, to like be that guitar guy.
Yeah. What kind of guitar?
It's just an acoustic guitar. I don't even remember what the brand is. I bought it on Facebook Marketplace from somebody here in town.
Maybe that can be your when you don't have time to light a candle or incense. That can be your strum out a couple of chords.
Yeah, I go sit on the couch and play a few chords just to keep my hands like muscle memory. But just to actually sit and do a lesson is hard to find. There's a lot of time at night.
Oh, I'm sure of it.
Because that's when I have to do it. But I get it, man. It's like I start singing something. I'll go, man, I just want that guitar in my hands, but I can't play it. So.
It's true.
I get it,
look at
man.
guys like Alex Lasher, and I'm like, if only I had that talent.
That's awesome, man. That's kind of funny.
Right. Final question. Oh, God.
Well, I have no idea what you...
Describe your God.
Wow.
And God is in quotation marks.
Wow. So that could mean God or like an idol or something like that you...
Yeah.
Man, that's a good question. So I haven't looked through every card in this deck, so they're as surprising to me as they are to you.
Yeah.
Huh.
So I'm not going to say that my thoughts on this have evolved. I'm going to say that they have grown. I grew up Southern Baptist in the most conservative of towns, DeRidder, Louisiana. And the idea that was placed in my mind of God was a very judgmental, keeps us under his thumb, all-powerful, omnipotent being that was constantly watching over us and cheering us on and loved us very much and wanted us to do well, but also like judgment was waiting. And the older that I've gotten and the more people that I've met and the more people of different religions that I've been able to interact with, I am quite discovering that, simply put, God is love. And he first loves us, and in so doing, challenges us to love others. And I think there's a lot of growth that can be done still on my part and in our community in the world if we would just learn to love others a bit more without first judging them or considering ourselves better than them or looking at their differences before we realize how much similarities we have. But God inspires us to love, and that is my God.
Wow, man. That answer, you could really expound on it, and there's no reason to, though, because that is the answer, that's the truth that we've been given, right? I mean...
And that everyone seeks. I mean, if we look at different religions across the world, they're all seeking this loving God who is in charge and in being and calls us to love. And it's just this millennial wave of grassroots love, like moving across the U.S. I think love is the answer.
Yeah. It's something my son struggled with for a long time because he would ask me things like, how come the people that profess to love God don't love me? He didn't understand, and so it made him jaded against anything that was for a long time.
And it goes against biblical principles. I mean, in order for others to have a chance at seeing the love that God offers, don't we have to be his hands and feet and love them first?
Yeah. God, I mean, look, I'll tell you can look around here. One of my favorite paintings, and I never can remember the artist, but if I saw it in a church a long time ago, I found it on eBay years ago, but it's this painting of Christ, and he's made up of all the people, right? I mean, you've got people like Gandhi in there, Martin Luther King, John F. Kennedy's in there, but then there's other people. From a distance, you see Christ, but when you get up close, it's people.
I absolutely believe that God moves amongst us and lives inside of us, and I just am so thankful that there is something greater than me that I have had an opportunity to personally interact with, and always roots for me and calls for me to be better. I think we attend church at Water's Edge.
Yeah.
And Tony Bork has been such a spiritual mentor. And they've got a great homeless program, and they've got a great food pantry program. And they are out in the community being hands and feet, giving people first what they need, because it's hard to talk to them about this God if they are so hungry that they can't even listen to the words that you're saying. And so if we meet people's needs and really give them the tools that they need to better themselves, then they can discover the desires of their heart and the love that God puts inside of them.
It's interesting. One of the connectors for me between Buddhism and Christianity came many, many years ago for me when I attended a Southern Baptist church as a child. That's where I was baptized, and I had a good experience there. I grew away from that, from there, for no real negative reason. I just did. But one of the connectors for me was years ago. I stumbled upon this prayer written by a Buddhist saint, and it just really touched my heart. But what was crazy is when I would read it, I didn't read it because it was Buddhist. I read it because it was touching me inside my heart, and what it was cracking open was compassion. Like, it was revealing the nature of compassion in this prayer. But I say all that to mean it led to this and it's hard to have this conversation without some backstory, but this Buddhist, I'll call it a deity. I don't know any other word that I try not to use words like that because it frightens people, but archetype, right? And I'll say that. Avalokiteshvara. And if you go look that up, the statues of this being is always with 1,000 faces and 1,000 arms. And a lot of people, that freaks them out. They're like, that's freaky looking. But when I looked at that, if you look closely, each of the hands has an eye on it, and each of the hands has a different tool in it, and each of the faces has a different perspective, right? Avalokiteshvara looked deeply into the world and saw the suffering of all the beings, human and otherwise, and was so overwhelmed with love that it shattered and grew into all these different hands and faces, and each hand basically represents what a person needs. And I saw Christ in that. Immediately. I saw Christ being poured out on all beings, all people.
Right.
And when you say that about Water's Edge, I'm a long way around. I come back to Water's Edge, and when you said that, you go to people and you have what they need, and you show them the face, one of the faces,
right,
of God.
Right. And I believe that our footsteps are numbered and ordered, and I believe that the experiences that have been placed in our life are there for a reason, so that we can help others. And when you start to come together with humanity, with love as the essence, in order to help others and put others in front of yourself and love God, then really, really miraculous things happen. And that's how we change the world. When we stop, just to bring it all back, when we stop discouraging our kids from being artists, when we encourage them to love, when we encourage them to follow their own passions and to help others, and stop being afraid of who they are and trying to hide that from others and to please others, then we accomplish much together.
Yeah.
It's been fun, man.
Man, it has been fun. I'm so glad you're at 1911.
It's going to be awesome.
Oh, man. I mean, you can tell, look, if somebody takes one thing away from this, it's to know the heart and soul that's beating behind the clock.
Well, I had a lot of notes that I was going to talk about work stuff, but and I think we have talked about a lot of work stuff.
There's something...
I've enjoyed this even more. I really have. This has been the most rewarding experience. Thank you.
I'm glad. A lot of people come in here and we do talk about some work stuff, but I think it's so important to, again, get back to the golden glue, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I've said that about this show. The people on here are weaving a golden seam throughout society, especially here. And I don't know. I think that's a beautiful thing. I mean, to know that there's a heart and soul behind it. It's not just taskmasters,
right
out there.
This is the stuff that matters. Yeah,
it does matter. It matters. And people relate, man. They see themselves in everybody that's been on here. They hear something that is real personal.
Sure.
So how do people get in touch with you, find out more about what you're doing and more about 1911?
Yeah, we're under the City of Lake Charles, and so of course our website is theirs, but it's cityoflakecharles.com/arts and culture.
Okay.
They can also follow us on our Facebook page, 1911 Historic City Hall, or you can reach out to me directly, 491-9159.
Right on.
Or my email, matt.young@cityoflc.us.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time. I know traveling across the bridge to Sulphur is not everybody's favorite task these days.
Come on, I enjoyed it. I actually flew across. Not actually,
Wasn't too bad?
Not actually, but it's fast.
That's gonna pass.
Yeah.
Everything passes, and then we forget. And, and we get all we make do.
Worried about something else.
Yeah, that's right. There's something else. No, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. And honestly, for me, it's so cool to know that we had connections with Miss Barnes. That really kind of blows my mind. When you said that first thing, I love that being a connection because, again, she's just like in your
Great
life.
influence.
Yeah, I want to get her on the show, actually.
Shout out to Alita Barnes.
Yeah, got to get her in here.
And I love